Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for making time for this roundtable interview as part of the Responsible Tourism Programme at World Travel Market. I've been wanting to put this together for some time, and Nick Linton kindly this year stepped into the breach and has managed to pull this session together. Nick, do you want to tell us something about what you do in relation to tourism in China?
Good morning, Harold. Yes, indeed. So I run a company that moves between the UK and China. We're called China Less Travelled. I guess some of the description will be in the name. We look for remote and unexplored regions and try to expose them to the West and get people to see another side to China that away from more of the mass tourism models. So we go to areas in Western Sichuan and Gansu and Xinjiang and Tibet and Guizhou and a lot of the Western regions that are less developed. And we look into ways to work with local communities, local families, to set up small bespoke groups, either whether it's hiking or working with as a DMC for larger organizations in the UK, such as Distant Horizons, who do the Oxbridge alumni tours, Wild Frontiers, who do more out there tours, and Martin Randall, who do academic-led tours. And we put together this infrastructure, and then we try to work with smaller organizations. And I personally go out and set up all of these tours myself, try to look for things that have a low impact and can really reach some of these smaller communities. That's really what we do. And I move between China and the UK, normally spending about 6 months in each place, 6 months developing these new experiences. And because China is changing so quickly all the time, I'm always out there looking for ways to keep going with what I'm doing and have a low impact and promote a positive side to what's happening in China.
Thanks very much, Nick. Jin Feng-Zhu, I think we've met before, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's good to see you again. Do you want to tell us something about what you do? Because you're very different from being a tour operator, aren't you?
Yes, and I'm from China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation. Our foundation was started in 1985 from the UK and from the returning of the Biodiversity Year. And recently we developed into the independent civil society organization. And our major task is to protect the biodiversity and to make sure green development. And the tourism related industry is a big area in China especially the infrastructure and especially during the construction of the infrastructure, we usually need to do environmental assessment. And we do think it's not enough to do general environmental assessment. We want to implement the biodiversity assessment during all infrastructure projects, and that we are trying to stop and slow down or try to change some projects to make it give the way to the biodiversity conservation. And also we are quite positive towards the policy making, towards the all tourism related regulations. We want to make all those more sustainable, and we also work very hard to protect the climate issue and to protect the public health issue, especially after the epidemic in China. We raised many of our concerns, and we got quite some support from the general public. And of course, we received very much pushback from the industry, especially including the tourism industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jin Feng. I think one of the interesting things for me about China is the extent to which people actually value landscapes as well as the wildlife, which is not so much a Western tradition. It's very much a difference, I think, between China and many parts of the West. Kevin, could we come to you next? Kevin He. Now you're actually, I think, involved with cities, aren't you? So that's a very different perspective, perhaps, from, for example, what's at the back of me here. But do you want to tell us something, Kevin, about what your organization does, the World Tourism Cities Federation?
Okay, first of all, I worked in CITS head office for over 30 years and in charge of English-speaking inbound department, especially in charge of American department to attract American visitors to go to China. And that is a big market. I worked over there for over 30 years. About 7 years ago, I also changed my job in CITS, not to include in charge of inbound, but also outbound and domestic tours, and also in charge of the computer online business, especially on the online sales. I think to all the business, promotion, not anything else. So I strongly believe China is a big market to the world and to domestic, all the Chinese people. It's rich of the tourism resources. And I love travel because I also travel a lot worldwide and travel everywhere in China almost. And so how to promote China? You promote nothing else. You promote China images, the Chinese cultures, and some fascinating. And then in the promotions, you can enlighten people's knowledge. And you can change people's some sense. And that is a good job. And you organize the enjoyment activities for the people. So that is I love. So after I get retired from CITS, I moved to WTCF. WTCF is an organization. It's not the city members only. And today we have about over 170 international cities worldwide in everywhere. And we only limited Chinese cities to be the membership. We only have 26 Chinese cities. That is a famous tourist city. So we focus the city federation, we only focus how to promote the city's images and not only the products and the destinations. City is people's destiny. City is more can be more organized and come together with all the business and that kind of group. And then we organized annually regular conference and activities to promote the cities. And then we also tell some countries and some cities how to promote, especially if you focus on the Chinese markets and focus on the Chinese outbound market, how to promote. And what kind of way and what kind of words and what kind of images Chinese people love to know. And we want some things more enlightening sense to the Chinese people, to get the Chinese people can learn and then can exchange. That is our federation's way. And today, for examples, we are focusing this year and the next year. How to, in this kind of situations, we promote our business when everything returns. For example, we focus on how to make the tourism city to be the more cultural sense city, more culture attractive cities, and make the people to understand more.
Kevin, we're going to come back. Can we just hang on to that thought? Because we're going to come back to this, Kevin,
Okay.
quite strongly, because I think one of the most interesting things about the role of the idea of responsible tourism is the notion of traveling with respect and with an open mind, and the whole question of how China is going to be understood by people in the West and how the West is going to be understood by people in China is obviously quite a major part of what goes on in tourism. I mean, you can either use tourism to increase prejudice or you can use tourism to reduce it. And at the heart of the idea of responsible tourism is reducing it. So Kevin, we're going to come back to that. Let me just go on, let Sam introduce himself, and then we'll go to Brian, and then we'll come back round. Sam.
Well, hello from Shanghai, Harold. Thank you very much for having me on today. Great to meet you. I am from the UK originally, but I've been based over here in China for actually around 17 years now, so quite a while. I'm the director of Bespoke Travel Company, and we are a small boutique travel operator that specializes in private custom design tours of various parts of China. Most of our clients generally in good times are visitors to China, so tourists coming from the States or from Europe or from other mostly Western countries. We, like Nick, we're really passionate about showing off and working with venues that are creative, that eschew kind of mass tourism for something more independent, and really showing off that side of China. Most of our guests come with little knowledge of the country, and we really try to show them what we know and love about it. We're based in Beijing and Shanghai, so our focus mostly has been on urban tours of some of China's biggest cities, these two cities, plus a handful of others, but that's changing at the moment. And we really try to show people not just China's history, but also some of its innovations and its future as well.
We'll come back perhaps, Sam, to the question of to what extent it's still possible to access traditional Chinese culture in the cities, because my sense of it is that it's changed so rapidly, you probably need to go to rural areas to find that traditional cultural context. But before we come back to those things, Brian, you've waited very patiently.
No problem here.
For your turn to say something about what you do. I have to say, I clicked on the Linden Center part of your email address, and it went straight to a Chinese site, which I thought was quite impressive. But I did manage to find you, and it looks to me as though you're very much into kind of meet the people style of tourism. Would that be fair?
Sure. I guess in a way similar to Sam, I've been here on and off since 1984, and I've watched China really. Obviously, I'm quite proud of the accomplishments that China has, that we've seen in the big cities and the economic changes. But I also felt that there was a little bit of a lack of a concern about maybe some of the cultural heritage that was being unfortunately destroyed, not like in the past where it was being destroyed for political reasons, but now purely out of greed. And Jeannie and I, my wife and I, in 2004, came over here with the idea of finding a historic compound that we could restore and turn it into some kind of a cultural retreat that would allow us then to supplement both the surrounding kind of culture with courses. I was a PhD student at Stanford, and I helped to direct a lot of courses off-site. And what we wanted to do was take that kind of model and bring it into rural China. But most importantly, we wanted most of the benefits to remain in the villages. I think that all of us know what is potentially responsible tourism, but how many of us can really bring the benefits into the villages? Our sites now, we have 7 sites. Our site where I'm sitting right now, our first site, has 16 guest rooms, and we employ about 50 to 60 people in the village. That is so hard to make that business model work. And this is what Jeannie and I felt we had to do, is not just come up with a concept, but really and move into these areas and dedicate ourselves to this, and hopefully some of the knowledge that we brought. So that's really what our focus has been. As I said, we have 7 sites. All of them are historic buildings. I have no private investors, and I only work with the government, and they have to buy into our social mission.
Thanks very much, everyone, for that introduction. What I'd like to do first, Nick, is I think come back to you and ask you how you see responsible tourism in relation to China. You brought this panel together around the theme of responsible tourism, and I know from having tried myself to do it in the past how difficult that is. I mean, part of the problem, I suspect, is that the very word has different meanings, as it does in Europe as well. I mean, it has different meanings everywhere. Does responsible translate well into Chinese?
I think so. I think the issue really is that China is such a huge and diverse, complex entity, and you've got so many different factors, so many different influences. It is hard to get a uniform model that's going to work in each region. Each region has its own very different issues to contend with. So, for example, I think there's a general model that works for domestic tourism, which has its pros and cons within the domestic market, which is very much about numbers, where you have huge volumes of local Chinese. There's different aspects. One aspect will be that they pay very little for their tour, and then they will be enticed to buy merchandise along the way, and there'll be large shopping experiences incorporated into. And there has to be something very big for the groups to see, and that creates a huge strain on a lot of the local infrastructure, and has transformed a lot of these smaller destinations into larger, very commercial entities. Which and that's a question. There's a question of sustainability there, but obviously the pluses of that model is that more and more infrastructure has been created to deal with these, and so you end up with areas, for example, like where Brian's from in close to northern Yunnan, where he's based, where you've got some of the bigger centers that are absorbing a lot of the mass tourism, and Brian can then function with his smaller model to get really into the villages and do something much more sustainable and positive. And if you take areas like Xinjiang in the west, where you've got the Gaotie, the high-speed train, and the Belt and Road Initiative, which is really opening up that area, some of the ancient ruins that were really just disappearing into the desert have now been attention has really been put onto those to preserve them and create greater access. So it's a complex area, and there's so many pros and cons and fors and against in every area. So it's very hard to disentangle. There are so many projects. I don't want to isolate too many projects at this stage and just say what I think, but I think it's different for everyone.
I guess the thing which the concept of responsible and responsibility generally has in most cultures is the idea you're actually going to take some sort of action. You're going to do something to reduce a negative or increase a positive. And in a sense, the reason that responsible tourism came to the fore, I think, was the feeling that the word sustainable was so often just attached to a marketing plea or a marketing pitch, and it didn't mean anything in practice. Jim Feng, can I come to you? If you could just put your microphone on. Do you have a sense that responsible makes sense for your colleagues and compatriots in China?
Yes, I think responsible tourism must be promoted and get more people, especially the office or the officials, understand. And recently, a couple months ago, the State Administration for Forest and Grassland of China, together with a few other ministries, including the public health, and published a new policy, a new regulation, trying to promote forest reserves, which is to help to build forest reserves in the forest to further promote tourism. But after we read the regulation, we openly criticize the new regulation because within the regulation, it says many things, but protection of the forest. We think we should add, first of all, to make protecting forest as the #1 condition to developing forest resource in China, especially today, which we think promoting forest resource, further promoting forest resource is something like the wildlife breeding, farming business. We should put the conservation and the habitat protection in the first place, and we should also to value the tourist, the forest resource, and according to the sustainable basis, and that we think we must put in those in the new regulation. And of course, we already have many conditions for infrastructure buildings, and we must do environmental assessment, but it's not enough. We think in China, especially in China, we should not to simply repeat those promotion of tourism, and we should take more care of biodiversity conservation, and we should take more care of the natural habitats of wildlife. And we get very positive feedback from our top leaders, and we are trying to amend, to change, to put responsible tourism as the #1 condition or the first source to promote any further tourism in China. Thank you.
So, thanks, Jim-Feng. I think what's interesting is we've already, and we're only halfway through this session, we've already had 3 examples really of using tourism to preserve the forests, the archaeological remains, and the communities in the rural areas. That's already happening. But and the similarities therefore with what's happening around the rest of the world. I hope people watching this realize that China is a very different and special place, but it has a lot of things in common with what's happening in other places in the world. Kevin, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, but I want first to tell you a story. I go fishing in Wales about once a year, unfortunately. It's all I have time for. I go fly fishing. I'm not very good at it, but I go. And coming out of a really remote part of mid-Wales, where very few foreign tourists get at all, the road was blocked by a hire car, and there were 4 Chinese tourists who jumped out of this hire car to take photographs of sheep. Now, there are more sheep in Wales than there are people, so this is an unusual thing to see. I tell the story because what it demonstrates, I think, is how quickly Chinese people have made the transition that, frankly, it took the Brits 30 or 40 years to make, from group tourism of the kind that you were describing, Nick, and the very large mass tourism of that kind, into quite adventurous individual and independent travel, the FIT route. And I just wondered, Kevin, if you wanted to comment on that, because I think that change has been extraordinarily fast by comparison with many other new source markets as they've opened up. So really, it was a dramatic reminder for me of just how fast things are changing in China.
I think for today, for the tourism industries and even for the cities and enterprises of the tourism business. And first of all, I have to emphasize on the cooperation and to put them together and to discuss many issues, even to talking about how to better use the new technologies and what is useful ways to promote, to teach people and then to attract people to go in different ways, the best ways, and to enjoy their travel activities and have a good result and a good experience. So today, for example, WTCF, we provide responsibility is to provide more opportunities for people to exchange their knowledges, to exchange their ideas, and how to use the best technology and the best ways to do the business. And then to attract more and more people who love travel outside. That is my...
From Colombia in the dining room. They're really nice.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Sam, I've noticed on your site, you put quite a lot of emphasis on having local tour guides, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you employ any international guides or do you use all local Chinese?
For us, it's a combination of the two. So we work with some really awesome, experienced local guides who are Chinese and are fully kind of licensed under the Chinese guide system. So I'd say they're really the backbone of our operation. They're incredibly smart and incredibly knowledgeable, and people who have come with the idea that China is like North Korea and that they're just going to be taken around by someone who's reciting government information are totally shocked by these people who are actually very well versed in global affairs, actually, and have very strong opinions of their own. So we're really, really proud of the guides that we work with and the way that they present these cities to people and the way that they can kind of connect with people from the US or from Europe and really surprise them with how switched on people here in China are. We do
Sam, I'm
also
sorry to interrupt you, but I really want to reinforce that point because I first went to China in '83 and I took a group. In retrospect, I think I must have been crazy, but it went okay. But we took a group that's so big we needed 2 coaches. But the point I want to make is that even in '83, the guides were not what you might expect to find in North Korea or somewhere else like that. That was never the case, but in my experience of tourism in China, really right from the beginning. The early '80s was right at the beginning. And that sense of having well-educated, articulate, independent-minded guides is something which I've always associated with China. And I just want to reinforce that point because I think too often people think of it that they're just going to get a standard tour. In some ways, I think you can have many other city tours in cities outside of China, which are much more like that than you're likely to find in China. But Sam, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Please go on.
No, I totally agree. It's one of the greatest misconceptions. You know, many of our guides are really well traveled, and apart from anything, they've got an awesome sense of humor, which is something that people don't always associate with China either. We do also work with some Western guides or foreign guides, I should say, who live here. Generally, they're in terms of specific industries. So, for example, contemporary art guides or people who do things related to IT and this kind of stuff. So it just depends. If someone's got the knowledge that our guests are interested in, then we work with Western guides. Often people who've lived in both countries are able to bring different perspectives, and they also understand where our guests are coming from as well. So especially in some areas, for example, I'd say traditional Chinese medicine, that's something that many Chinese people grow up with almost innate knowledge of. They absorb it from when they're young. It's actually really, really hard for them to explain it to a Westerner, whereas a Westerner who studied that here is able to understand the differences and the concepts that are so different, and they're sometimes able to articulate that in a way that is more accessible to visitors.
Thanks very much indeed, Sam. I want to come back to you now, Brian, if I may, and perhaps just push you a little bit.
Of course.
It seems to me, I think this is an interesting thing. I look at your site, and it's a fantastic site. Let's not kid ourselves. And I look at what you're offering, and I'm thinking a craft fair and farmers market, artist in resident, culinary festival, harvest festival. How Chinese is this?
Most of it is like the Harvest Festival, of course, is local. I guess what we're trying to do is Jeannie and I had just seen as China, especially as we saw the development of old towns, say like in, I don't know if you know Fenghuang, Wuzhen, Lijiang, we just saw that so much of the competition was increasingly focused on the hardware, on how big the bathtub is, how big the room is, how sexy the design is. And often it was becoming more and more removed from what I felt, what I think most of us felt was the indigenous culture. And we were copying designs from the Mediterranean, from California, from whatever. And we were proud of that in some of these destinations. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to take these old buildings that in no way can meet often the comfort needs of the nouveau riche in China, of the wealthier traveler. And we have tried instead to make up for what we lack in comfort by really focusing on activities and really focusing on interaction and immersion with our local community. That even includes, like, Harold, if you can come, we offer every guest an opportunity to share their knowledge, their profession with the local community. So we'll do Ma Yo-Yo's, Yo-Yo Ma Silk Road Ensemble groups here, and we focus, they have to spend half of their time interacting with the local communities, and I demand that of them. So this is something that we're trying to do so that we just build more interaction. And this is something that I feel is missing sometimes from the Chinese travel experience, especially the cultural experience, which I think has become increasingly Disneyfied, and shopping focused and bar streets. And I feel that that is something that I think China has much more to offer than that.
I mean, I guess my response to that, Brian, would be to say that actually that Disneyfication has been a problem with tourism all over the world.
Of course.
And we are seeing, undoubtedly, we're seeing a rebellion against that by contemporary travelers who are looking for a much more authentic experience. And I think that's one of the things that China potentially can offer a great deal of, as well as, of course, the mass tourism, which needs to exist. But can I just push you a bit harder? Can you tell me a bit about the place-based education programs? Because that looks just amazing, really.
Yeah, we targeted, say, like President Obama's girls' school, Sidwell Friends. And my goal was always to try to help in some way China's soft power. I wanted the world to see China in a way, almost like through my eyes. And so we've taken some of the top schools from around the world and we bring them into our community. My second site is an international school campus. And they come not for a week of fun, they come for 5 months. And we turn the local community we incorporate the local community, their cultural traditions into their study, into their curriculum. Their environmental studies takes place up in the Sangshan Mountains on our high lake. So what we're trying to do is make this the focus of their studies. And this is something we do at all different levels right now, as you see with the different things. So that's what it means, place-based education.
For me, it's really interesting. It's when I was working in adult education more years ago than I probably care to remember, I was doing Meet the People tours in China. That's why I first went to China in '83, was to organize that kind of trip. But we were in Vietnam and India as well, doing similar kinds of things, trying to help people to understand the world's diversity. And I think that is one of the key opportunities in tourism, is to help people to understand and to celebrate the diversity. And China is, I mean, in a way I laugh when people say they're going to visit China. I don't know how you visit China. You visit parts of China in one trip, but you can't. It's like saying you're going to visit America. It's a kind of crazy notion, isn't
Exactly.
it? It's way too big. You can't even really visit Britain. It's too diverse and so on. But Nick, could I come back to you perhaps and just ask, is any of this happening the other way? Are we seeing groups of Chinese tourists beginning to have similar experiences in Europe, for example? Is this a two-way traffic, this opportunity to increase international understanding between different ethnic groups and different countries?
Very much so. I think, as you addressed earlier about the Chinese with the sheep experience, there are more and more Chinese traveling independently. I think still there are an awful lot of Chinese coming over to Europe that are following this almost a 1980s, 1990s Chinese tourism model, where they go in mass groups and they go to the various shops. But I think that is changing. I think we've highlighted very clearly the difference in expectations between the Western market and what's currently been going on in China. But I think one of the things, when Dr. Zhou talked about the concern about the environment, one of the positive aspects that we can bring from China is they can move. The Chinese move very quickly. They're keen to adapt and change. Any model that they feel isn't working or isn't being successful, they will change. And I think what's happening in Europe, these mass groups, it's a very short-term model, and more people are becoming independent. They're wanting more access to bespoke experiences, cooking courses, having private tours with 2 or 3 people, visiting people in their houses, all sorts of social interactions. They're definitely, it's emerging fairly quickly. But still, I think at the moment, the Chinese model is slightly behind the Western model in terms of their expectations, but that could be reversed very quickly. And I think in the current climate, if you look at areas, for example, in Europe, take Venice, that is being completely overrun and it really isn't sustainable. At the moment, the fact that very few people are actually going to these sites, it gives us an opportunity to really readdress in the West how we can manage these, how we can make them more sustainable to tourism, not just from China, but any other groups that are coming in, because it really isn't sustainable the way things are going as the world is opening up. So it is changing. But I think the situation we're in now is going to have an impact on where we go from here.
Can we come back, Jinfeng, to your agenda around the conservation of natural heritage? Because it seems to me that China, I mean, even when I first went to China in '83, I remember going to the Great Wall and being, do you want to just switch your mic back on, Jinfeng? I remember going to the Great Wall and being quite shocked by the number of tourists. And if I'm honest, thinking actually the Great Wall was a better experience in those wonderful photographic shots that you get from the air, where you can see the magnificence of the wall. And that is a challenge, isn't it? Because you have a large, increasingly mobile population. And I would say with more of a sense of the importance of landscape than we have in most of Europe. So there's a natural predisposition. You just have to look at the history of art in China to see the real importance of those rural landscapes to Chinese people, which you see at some periods in English art, but you don't see it throughout in the way you do in China. So the pressure will be enormous, won't it, on those areas of rural China which can be reached by transport in one form or another. Are you concerned about that?
Yes, and this is a very important issue. And we think we need to change our policy from promoting tourism to the sustainable or responsible tourism nationally. And recently we criticized the Golden Week. You may know the policy about Golden Week. In the Chinese, many years ago, Chinese government want to promote tourism during the vacation holiday season. And so starting at that time, every year, before 1 year, the central government make announcement for all the adjustment for the next year's holidays to make it a longer week. We call it the Golden Week. And this is very good tool to promote tourism, but it's terrible today, especially considering the acceptance, the travel issues, the size, the resource issues, but hotels issues. We should change from today from the promoting Golden Week to stop. we must to make all tourism based on responsible tourism instead of promoting tourism, because of we have such a big, huge mobility people and such a huge population. We need to change totally. We must to have people to enjoy tourism instead of simply shopping tourism, simply sightseeing tourism, to make it a recreation, enjoyment, learning, and more factors into the tourism, and to make it, to cut the peak, and to make it balanced, to make it responsible. And we think we must start the new era of the big tourism industry. We need to learn from all aspects, including the travel means, the all ways, through every aspects of the tourism. We need to change to responsible, to change to sustainable, to change to the to pay enough attention to the environment, to the climate, to the public health, and we need to change. It's time to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Junfeng. I think one of the differences that I perceive, and I may have this wrong, but one of the differences I perceive that in many places which have gone through the kind of rapid urbanization, which has obviously occurred in China really very rapidly over the last 20 to 30 years, there's, in many other places, there's been a tendency to turn their back on rural life, to see it as something which they're glad to have escaped and so on. But China still, it seems to me, every holiday, you see that massive migration of people back to their village, which you certainly are now beginning to see in other places. I cite India as an example of this, but there was a period when that didn't happen, and children in India are being reintroduced to their agricultural family origins. But in China, that connection wasn't lost, was it? People still have that connection with the rural area, which means a lot of the visiting is actually going back to where the family came from in the rural area. Have I got that right, Kevin? Is that a characteristic of tourism in China?
Sure. Chinese people love to go many places, include their homelands, and even their mother's homeland or father's homeland, and to see their roots. But we have many choices. And roots, sometimes we can talk it in our eating tables and to talk about more meanings, more significance by talking, and then to visit a place. But Chinese people really, they like to make enjoyment. They, first of all, they like to do some activities where it's available to go and accessible to go. For example, we are talking about tourism, over-tourism, and even we're talking about the tourism impact. But according to our promotions, we have many things, and we have many potential ones to talk. For example, and this world is a creational world. Depends on how we can create the new topics, new items, new attractions, and change our viewpoints, and change our interests, change our consumption behaviors. A lot of things to do. And so we think, first of all, to do the promotion and change your topics and create the new items and new highlights. That is one thing. And another one is better to training our industrial enterprises. Because I think we still have a lot of things to learn. Even today, China, the tourism development is so much quickly. But we also have to talk about that. how to create a new. Creation is our life issues today. So any that kind of things, over some things, over this, over that, that is, we do not want to complain. That is the impact. That is our challenges. Based on the challenges, what kind of new ways you can find out. So that is my issue. So
one of the things which is really,
I like to say, we have to go to the training. Today, the whole industry do not have much available or good trainings for the whole industries.
Kevin, that's true all around the world. It's not just a problem in China, it's a general problem. I just want to point out to the people watching this, it's extraordinary what we've achieved completely by accident. In my view, it's by accident anyway. Behind Jinfeng there is a wonderful map of the protected areas in China and the river system. Behind Kevin, we've got a really nice piece of local flora. And behind Brian, we've got a remarkable collection of Chinese artifacts which reflect the different cultural traditions of China. I think we've done very well there. And Sam, thank you for bringing us modern China behind you there on the photograph. I think that's quite an achievement. What I wanted to say, just in concluding this, is I think the people watching this will have had an interesting and I hope enlightening introduction to tourism in contemporary China. And if I might say for myself, again, to thank you, Nick, for bringing this group together, but also to say I hope it's the beginning of being able to engage with people from China in discussing many of these issues, not only at other WTM shows, but also throughout the year. So, for example, Kevin, it's pretty clear we're going to be having some more seminar sessions on the challenge of over-tourism, and it would be really good to involve you and some of your colleagues in China in those. And Jinfeng, similarly, we've got a session on biodiversity. I don't think there is a China person on that, but in future, I'd hope very much that would be. If I might say, Brian, I think the work we're doing on local economic development is very close to what you're doing with your initiatives in rural China, and I certainly like to engage with you on that. And Sam and Nick, I think the way in which you're bringing out the experiential travel and using local guides and local experiences is just absolutely at the cutting edge of what's happening with international tourism. So if I could just end by thanking you all for taking part in this. I think it's been for me, it's been fantastic at last to get China onto the agenda of responsible tourism at World Travel Market. And it's certainly the beginning of a process and not the end. So if I may just say thank you to all of you for that. It's been a really enjoyable and I hope enlightening discussion.
Hopefully we can encourage some more people to come and see it for themselves as well.
Sam, exactly. The marketeer will always come out. No, that's absolutely right. We should do that. And also to create international understanding.
To travel everywhere.
Thanks very much, guys.